We began last week working through the beginning of the book of Habakkuk, or Habakkuk. When you look through this book, it's only 3 chapters long, and it is a rather bizarre book in that Habakkuk never speaks to the people for God. He speaks to God, and he has like this interaction, this fight, this struggle with God. And so a formal conversation, hence the name of the series, Colloquy, where he goes back and forth saying, God, I cry out and you don't listen to me. So before I jump in, I'm gonna pray, and then we're gonna recap just a little bit of stuff from last week to get us in the right frame of mind, and then we're gonna move forward with God's response. So last week we did Habakkuk's initial complaint, and now we'll move on to God's response. So if you're at home, I invite you to pray with me. If you are making coffee or checking email or doing all those other things, I would ask that you would press pause on those things, literally, so that you can begin to pay attention, because I'm going to ask God to speak, and it is our due diligence to actually invite him to do that physically. So, Spirit, I ask that your words would speak beyond that of things that we see through a screen, the amazing technological advancements that we can come with an empty room and people all over Sioux Falls, even outside of the local area and the tri-state area, that are actually interacting online. I pray a blessing over the technology, God, that you would let YouTube and Google and all of those big tech world things allow us to continue this. But this morning, right now, maybe for the next 10, 15, 30, 45 minutes, I pray that you would help us to listen. I pray that beyond just the tangible things we hear with our ears, that you would speak to our hearts, our minds, our souls, our will, that deep down inside that part of us that doesn't really understand, that you would speak. That in the midst of a busy world, in the midst of a chaotic election cycle, in the midst of who the heck knows what 2021 is going to bring, I pray that you would speak today, and that today we would be able to hear you. So Lord, let your voice fall like a heavenly rain. Let that rain trickle into our ears and down our spine and beat throughout our entire body, so that this day, this hour, right now, we hear you. In your name, amen. Okay, so we're going to jump right in, beginning of Habakkuk, and I'm just going to recap some of this. I'm going to read it very quickly. I trust that you'll be able to see it right here on the screen. If you don't, it should be on your Bible app, and if you actually have a real Bible at your house, you can open that up too. The prophecy that Habakkuk, the prophet, received, and we talked about this last week, that the prophecy that Habakkuk, the prophet, received really reads in the Hebrew, the burden that Habakkuk saw, that he has a practical, tangible interaction. Maybe this is a vision rather than just auditory words, but he has an interaction with the Lord, and it is a burden that he must carry. How long, O Lord, must I call for help, but you do not listen? I cry out to you violence, but you do not save. And the words here for call and cry aren't just like, oh God, why don't you help me? But it literally means to shout and scream, I need help, and you don't listen to me. Why do you make me look at injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and conflict abounds, and the law is paralyzed. Justice never prevails. The wicked hem in and surround the righteous, though that justice is perverted. Now, this is kind of where we came from. Where we'll go is that verse 5. And it says, look at the nations and watch. Be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe even if you were told. So that's where we left off last week, that Habakkuk cries out and says, God, why? Why don't you listen to me? Why don't you respond when I cry? And God says, okay, I'm responding, and you won't believe it. Now, part of this is a little bit of historical context so you grasp this. So you can put the map up next. And here I took our picture from last week, and what I did was add a few arrows within some media presentation stuff. So you can see that on the east, I'm trying to decide here, so that would be on the east. So on the eastern side, you see all of the red areas with Babylon, and you see Persia and Media. What happens is Babylon attacks Assyria, and they make a pact, an ally with Persia and the Medes up in the north. These will eventually become a whole different army that we find under Cyrus, but at this point, Babylon moves into Nineveh. This is where the scary Assyrians are, and they chase them to that area that is just over towards the Mediterranean Sea called Carchemish. Now in Carchemish, then what they did was the Assyrians cried out for help, and they cried all the way to Egypt. So down in the south, the Egyptian pharaoh Necho comes up, and as he's coming up, you can see kind of two arrows in there. You can see the one going up about halfway that's kind of a light blue. This is where good King Josiah, the king that brought about reform and started tearing down all of the idol worshiping areas and tried to bring the people back to God, finds the book of the law, and this is in the 640 to 610 BC time. He tries to bring about change. Well, he thinks that part of that change is to fight the Egyptians so that they can't help out the Assyrians. Josiah dies, so that's what the light blue arrow is. And then as he goes up, Necho goes all the way up to Carchemish, helps defeat the Babylonians in one of the few defeats that they ever encounter, and then comes back down Jerusalem about 3 months later. So after 3 months, he comes down, and we see this weird swap in 2 Kings, I think it's 23 or 24, where we see Josiah's two children swap the throne. So one has it for about 3 months, and then Necho takes him away and installs the other one and gives him a new name. I can't remember if it's Jehoiakim or Jehoiakim or something like that. But what he does is he institutes his king in the area. And so what happens is from 609 BC on, we get this period of Habakkuk. From 609 to about 605 is probably this conversation that God and Habakkuk have. Somewhere in that midst. And Habakkuk is crying out because they saw good things coming, and now everything is going back to the way it was. That all of the area that once served the Lord, or at least by mouth served the Lord, not necessarily by heart. We find that in Jerusalem, the struggle with Jeremiah and the people. Then we begin to see that Habakkuk is crying out because the Pharaoh has come through, their great king is gone, now they're left as just people struggling. And he cries out and he asks for a response. So I'm going to take a second and see what you got. So Luke Bo says, I thought I was in line for it and gave it to a gal, left the business, and then decided to move back for, job promotion. I missed the first one. So he thought he was getting a job promotion and then didn't get it. Not being able to have Thanksgiving or Christmas or be able to see any of the family. What's Dennis got? Linda says, I need to say good morning, so we have 2 shots at almond patties. That didn't answer my question. Oh yeah, Anne has, the cancer didn't go away. And there's a much longer story there that those of you that have been around for a while know exactly what she's talking about. For God to heal my mom from payola, and then mom died. Same situation, that we cry out to God and we say, God, help, we need this, we want this, and God's response isn't what we intended or isn't what we desired. So I actually remember, it was almost 18 years ago, as the end of November, December, Carrie and I got married, and we were young and poor and had no money and just moved to Sioux Falls and were working at going to school and stuff, and we were in college and decided that we would just go to Minneapolis for our honeymoon, which is not very exotic, but is practical when you have no money. And so we go up and we get our hotel, and then we do some shopping, and it's like, we should go for a nice dinner. And now we're 20-ish, and we go to this fancy restaurant, and it's one of those where you open the menu and you look at each other and you go, I think I'm gonna have water. You gonna have water? You should have water. And like, we knew this was coming, but it's that moment where you go, we should have water. And so we both get water. No, water's fine, nothing else, because everything on the menu is like $40 and something. And when you don't really have much money, that's really splurging. And so you're like, okay, well, at least the food is going to be really good. And I order like this chicken thing with some rice, because that's all I really ate during those days was chicken and rice. And then Carrie ordered some sort of pasta. It may have even been before she learned that she was allergic to Alfredo. So either a spaghetti or an Alfredo, but I don't think it even had any meat in it, so then it was cheaper. And the food comes out, and no joke, if you can see, like the palm of your hand was a chicken thigh. The palm of your hand, like they say you're supposed to eat of like meat, you know? So you see the palm of your hand, it was a chicken thigh with one of the bones was broken and sticking straight up. And so it was this weird kind of like, supposed to be decorative and fancy with this kind of rice pilaf thing underneath. And I was like, okay, well, let's try it. And I took a bite and was like, you can ask Craig or the other people on staff. If I don't like things, my face cannot lie. And it was one of those moments where I so wanted it to taste good. And it was like, well, it's okay. It was fine. And Carrie ate hers, and it was fine. But they were not $40 a plate meals. So we did what every good couple does in that situation. On the way home, we stopped at Dairy Queen for chicken strip baskets, so that we could actually fill our tummies with some food and a Blizzard. Chicken strip basket with gravy, mind you. Usually I would pick barbecue sauce, but with a chicken strip basket, their gravy is okay. Another time, so that's one time where what we thought we were getting wasn't what we were getting and what we wanted. And I'm sharing these just to get us in the frame of mind for the thing. And another time, I had read books from this author, multiple books, and really enjoyed him, and literally based the premise of a church plant here in Sioux Falls after a lot of his work. And his daughter, I believe, happened to go to Dort or Northwestern, and he was in town. So I went down to this thing that he was speaking at, kind of this formal but smaller gathering where people could actually have time one-on-one with him. And I met him and went through things and then left and got in the car and was like, I don't think I can ever read another book from him. It was so disappointing. Every question I asked, he sounded like he didn't even care. It was more like a pit stop on the way home from visiting family, just so he could write off the miles. It was just one of those where you finish the conversation and you go, oh, well, you have now been lowered about 50 points in my spectrum of whether I care what you write on a book or not. Or think along the lines of somebody tells you, oh, you got to go and see this movie. So good, so good. And you sit down and you get your popcorn, and you get your snacks, and you start watching the movie, and you get done, and you get out to the car, and you realize it wasn't as good as they said. That's kind of the context here. So back to Habakkuk. I'm going to push through a large chunk of the end of chapter 1. So follow along with me. There will be stuff up on the screen here. Chapter 1, we've just finished with Habakkuk at the beginning, crying out to God, saying, why do you let these horrible things happen? And he responds, for I am raising up the Babylonians. Now, this is a direct translation that will be helpful for... Did my mic just get goofy? Okay. You changed things, and I was not listening for the change, so you messed me up. I thought that something happened. Okay. I do want to be able to hear myself in the room, though, because that's what I'm used to hearing. So if it does go away, then my brain doesn't tell me that I'm speaking right. Okay, perfect. Okay, they can't hear what you're saying. Craig is saying things to me. For those of you at home, we were having a technical difficulty because he chose to change things in the middle when I wasn't ready for them to change. And I made a big deal out of it, which I should have not done and just kept on talking. Back to Habakkuk. Everything should be good on your end. I will calm the little people on the inside that tell me things that don't need to be told to everybody else. Habakkuk 1, verse 6. I am raising up the Babylonians. Now, in the original, this says the Chaldeans. And many of you at home, if you have a different translation, may have, I am raising up the Chaldeans. The Chaldeans is just the area on the map in which Babylon resides. And so you can think way, way back to Abraham, who came from Ur of the Chaldeans. This is the same area just above the Persian Gulf, where this people group, the Babylonians, that ruthless and impetuous people who sweep across the whole earth, seizing dwellings that are not their own. They are feared and dreaded people. Literally, they translated this in the past tense, but it says, like a better way to translate this is, they are a frightening and terrifying people. So, not only are they sweeping across the land, but they terrify people. They are a law to themselves and promote their own honor. They basically what that's saying is Habakkuk is hearing from God. They choose to do whatever they want to do. They don't have a God that they ascribe to that actually tells them what to do. They are their God, and we'll see this come up later on again. Their horses are swifter than leopards, fiercer than wolves at dusk. Think wolves where they can see better in the dusk light than most other things can. It's perfect hunting hour. Their cavalry gallops headlong, and their horsemen come from afar. They're all different types of people coming together. They fly like an eagle swooping to devour. Now, the word here isn't necessarily specifically eagle. And the hard part is those of us, especially that live in South Dakota or have the opportunity to have a actual glimpse of a bald eagle or the large eagle that we kind of think of, is they are a large and majestic, and if you see them actually do something scary, they could be a very scary bird. The word here can also be interchangeable with vulture, and so think in your head the picture of a vulture, but all of the big and scariness that you think of with an eagle would be a better way to kind of grasp that in your mind. That they fly like vultures swooping in to devour. Or if you have children and you've watched the movie about the good dinosaur and those like pterodactyls come in and they follow the storm. When they follow the storm will provide. That is kind of the thing. That these Babylonians come in like a scary animal coming to get what they want. They come intent on violence. Their hordes advanced like the desert wind, and they gather prisoners like the sand. Now, here's one of those things where if you don't understand the geography, this part doesn't make sense. Like it does, you hear it and you go, oh, they're hordes, the big scary people, they advance like a desert wind. Okay, well that seems kind of scary, and we grasp that they gather prisoners like the sand. Well, when you look at the map, and you don't have to put it up again, Tanner, but when you think of Israel, you have Israel, and to the west is the Mediterranean, and to the east is desert. Nothing but desert and sand. Nobody goes across there. One of the few people that ever did anything like this was actually Alexander the Great, and all of his generals told him he was crazy, and eventually he won a great battle. But nobody goes to the east. Nobody goes to the desert. And when you look at it in a meteorological standpoint, there, I eventually got it, almost all of the storms that Israel has comes from the west, comes from the Mediterranean. It builds up all the moisture in the Mediterranean Sea, and it comes towards Jerusalem. So literally, half of Jerusalem can get almost twice the amount of rainfall as the other half. So when a storm comes from the desert side, it is atrocious. It is horrible. It is so bad that it sweeps out multiple roads and streets, and anything that comes from the desert side means it's really, really bad. And so when you read this, he's saying their hordes advance like the worst storms. Not like just the rainfall that comes from the western side, but from the east. The literal Hebrew says, and their faces from the east advance like the wind. So like the wind that comes from the desert side, the scary wind. Squirrel. Sorry, I'm reading the chat. You guys are chatting beside me. I saw Sean Drummond's squirrel. got me again. I got to not read that. Verse 10. They mock kings and scoff at rulers. They laugh at all of the fortified cities. By building earthen ramps, then they capture them. Now, this is one of the things where you have to remember that there aren't trees everywhere. So what the Babylonians did is they literally dug up the dirt beside them and piled it up on a hill until they could go over the fortified walls. I think when Lyle went to Israel, he actually saw some of this. Where was that, Megiddo, or was that in one of the big cities, or one of the areas where there was fighting? What we find later on, actually not in Habakkuk, but in the 300s BC, is Alexander the Great will come down from the north and attack Tyre, which is just on the northern side of Galilee. And the thing with Tyre is Tyre was also an island city, so all the fancy stuff was on the island and all the normal people were on the mainland. Well, what he did was the exact same thing as he learned from the Babylonians, is he took every single brick and stone from the city on the land and filled it in and made a causeway all the way out to the island. Here we see the Babylonians setting that precedent. They would dig the dirt up, pile it against the wall so that they could come in. They weren't scared of anything. They would then sweep past like the wind and go on. Guilty people, those whose strength is their God. They have their own strength. Their own God is them, what they choose. Now, the reality is there could be a whole sermon on this for us, that many times what we choose becomes our God and we just label it with a big G and say God will bless it. But I'm not going to do that today because I don't think that grasps the full struggle here. So we have Habakkuk at the beginning where he cries out to God, violence, struggle. Why don't you do something? Why don't you help? Why is all this stuff coming out? Why is the law literally paralyzed and numb and it doesn't do anything? We see it, we know it, but it does nothing. And God says, don't worry. I'm going to send the Babylonians and they'll wipe everybody out. Well, I don't think that's what Habakkuk wanted to hear. Verse 12, Habakkuk's rebuttal is what I would call this. Lord, are you not from everlasting? My God, my Holy One, you will never die. Now, I'll pause here, and you could read that with a little bit of sarcasm, where he's saying, I thought you were the one that lived forever. I thought you were the one from the beginning. There is no beginning, no end for you. And this is your response. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, you have ordained them to punish. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. Here, this is Habakkuk being the religious one and telling God what he can and can't do because he decides, you're too pure. You're too good. And these are all true things, but the thing that we forget as normal people is God can do absolutely anything he wants, any way he wants, how he wants, if he wants to. If he wants to. Habakkuk is arguing, you shouldn't want to. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. And we know all this from the scripture. Why then do you tolerate the treacherous? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those more righteous than themselves? You are from everlasting to everlasting, and you let the wicked people execute judgment on the less wicked people. That doesn't make sense. Verse 14. You have made people like the fish in the sea, like the sea creatures that have no ruler. The wicked foe pulls all of them up with a hook. He catches them in his net. He gathers them in his dragnet, and so he rejoices and is glad. Here, Habakkuk is using his own illustration of saying, you've treated us like people that are like fish in the sea, and a fisherman comes along and just takes us and does whatever he wants. Therefore he sacrifices, this is speaking of the fisherman, he sacrifices to his net and burns incense to his dragnet. And by this he lives in luxury and enjoys the choicest food. Is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying nations without mercy? Now here's where we pause. Habakkuk begins and says, I cry out and you don't answer. And then God says, just wait, I'm going to do something that you would never ever believe. Does he do that? He tells him, I'm sending the Babylonians. Now, you have to sit for a moment and ask the question, whether you like it or dislike it, does God answer Habakkuk's prayer? Does he answer his cry? Does he answer his lament? Does he answer his screaming and shouting for justice? Absolutely. Hey, there's nobody righteous in Jerusalem. There's nobody to do away with the evil people, so I'll take a more evil people and execute judgment that way. Now, for most of us, we go, I don't like that. But the answer was, I will answer you. You don't want it, all of the people that are living unrighteous, so I'll send more unrighteous or unrighteous-er people to come and take care of them. You get what you wanted. You got what you asked for. I got the plate of chicken and rice that I really, really wanted. You went to the movie that you really wanted to go see, and you got done and you realized that's... my expectation didn't meet the reality. What Habakkuk wanted was for God to show up with awe and power like he would from the beginning, from the ages past, and execute judgment on his own people himself. And what he chose to do is do something that no one would believe. Now here's where things get even a little more hard. Habakkuk responds back and continues on. So we've gone through where he complains about them being like fish in the sea, and then chapter 2 begins, and whoever is in the NIV or whoever decides how they break up chapters totally shanked this one. This should totally be in the end of chapter 1 and not the beginning of chapter 2, but that's okay. I've cleared that up for you. Habakkuk continues after saying, would you let them just not be merciful and continue on? Then he says, I will stand at my watch and station myself on the ramparts. I will look to see what he will say to me and what answer I am to give to this complaint. Now, when you read that, you go, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense. Let me read it in a very literal way. Now, this is a little more clunky, but it gets at the root meaning here. I will stand at my watch post. I will remain stationed on the rampart, the city wall. I will keep watching so that I can see what he says to me and can know how I should answer when he counters my argument. Habakkuk cries out. God responds and says, okay, I'll fix your problem, but you won't like it. And Habakkuk says, you're right, I don't like it, and I still don't think it's fair, so I'm going to stand and wait and watch. And I know you'll respond, but I'm not moving. Now here's two takeaways that you can have. One, when you have struggle in your life, when you have things that you don't like, when you, maybe some of you are sitting at home and you were banking all of your emotional energy on an election within the United States, and yes, there are some of you, and you don't get the answer that you wanted, then you cry out. Habakkuk cried out, said, that's not the answer I wanted. That's not how you told me you behave. This isn't what I really want. When you pray and you pray and you pray, and God's answer is, I'll take away the pain. Now, that's the answer that's the right answer, but it's not the one that you really wanted. Towards the end of my grandparents' life, that was the answer that I wanted for them. But that's not the answer that I navigated through when I was in my teens and my dad died. I experienced and very practically saw things that people only see in the worst of war times. The most atrocious things that you could never really grasp unless you saw them. And I still ask the question, why the heck did that happen? Now here's the second part. We may not like what God says, and that's okay. Sometimes He does answer us against what our expectations are. He gives us an answer. Sometimes the answer is yes, sometimes it's no, and sometimes it's not yet. But what we usually do is we go, God, that's not what I wanted. Fine, I'm done. I'm done. I give up. And many leave faith. Many stay within the church and then don't practice their faith. Many get mad and do nothing about it except for recede back and sulk. Habakkuk shows us exactly what we should do. If you don't like what God's doing in your life, go and stand on the outside of the ramparts of the city, on the place in which He will come and say, I'm going to stand here until you give me an answer. Now, you may not like how long you have to stand, but eventually God will answer. What you can't do is yell at God and say, give me an answer, and then go about the rest of your business. That is not the message that Habakkuk shows us. Each of us will live through struggles in some form or another. Each of us will have moments where we don't like what God is doing in our lives. And it's okay to tell Him. That's what the book is showing us. It's okay to voice your displeasure with what's going on. I think practically what's not okay is to voice your displeasure and then walk away. This is like when my children yell at me. Zenny does this sometimes. I am not very happy with you right now, Dad. And then she walks off and goes away around the corner. To which I have to let her know, you need to come back and we're going to talk. And sometimes I say that much louder. But it's not one of those where you can just yell and scream at God and then run away and expect things to just be. Because then what you're saying is, that's fine, I'm okay with your answer. Habakkuk through and through says, God, I don't like your answer, and I'm going to wait until you respond. And the point that I read the literal version was, I'm going to wait so I can see what He says to me, and then I can know how I should answer Him back. This is a conversation, and I'm not finished. I didn't get what I wanted. You gave me exactly what I wanted, but not how I wanted it. And so I'm going to stand and wait. And I'm going to wait here so that when you respond, I can respond back. Because it's not just me yell my piece and walk away and storm away and be pouty. That's not how God works. He wants the interaction. He wants the conversation. He wants you to acknowledge the things that you don't like because that is real. So I'll recap your two things. One, God may answer you in a way that you don't like. And He just can. It is an ethical and theological conundrum to try and explain why, other than He can do whatever He wants. In this case, He can use a less righteous people to take over a people that are supposed to be His chosen ones. The other thing is don't give up. Habakkuk shows us that it's okay to come before the Lord and ask for something. And when we don't get the response we wanted, it's okay to ask for clarification. It's okay to continue to cry out and not just grab our pillow and go away. Now, that doesn't mean that the response comes soon. We don't know how long Habakkuk stands on the ramparts and waits, but he stands and waits for God's response. Next week, join us and we will see what God's response is. I invite you to pray with me. God, I ask that in the midst of all of the things in our lives, the struggles that we've had in the past, the struggles that lay ahead of us, that in all of it, that you truly would be King of Kings and Lord of Lords, that as Habakkuk says, you are the everlasting one, you are the rock, you are the one that is righteousness. I pray that you would help shape us to be more and more okay with the things that you are okay with, to be able to grasp the vision that you have, that's a little farther out, that maybe might not be quite so myopic. I pray that when we don't like the things that are going on in our lives and we cry out to you, that you would give us perseverance and persistence and the ability to stand and wait for a response. Give us faith that lasts beyond now or a few moments. In your name, amen.